There's a reason I love all this stuff, because it explains the world. All right. It's not that I'm trying to put these things out there like a boring, droning book. I'm trying to put them out there because I can see how these things have made such a spectacular and significant change in my life. I can see how in my life I was ripping myself apart and I was destroying the people around me. And actually, the closer people got to me, the less I was able to love them properly and even respect them. At that point, I didn't really know how to love unconditionally. But I found it difficult to respect people that got close to me because I didn't have the respect for myself. And that sounds ridiculous. And at the time, I would have told you, no, that wasn't true. That wasn't the way it was at all, because I couldn't see it that way. I was in too deep. And I think this relates back to why in fighting monsters, we have a risk of becoming them.
On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit around the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self.
So there's quite a famous phrase, those who fight monsters should take care not to become them. And that sounds ridiculous at the start. If there's something I don't want in my life, if there's something that I don't agree with, if there's something I don't think should exist, why, in fighting it, would I become it? It sounds ridiculous. It sounds counterintuitive. The last thing you're going to become is the thing you hate, right? But conversely, there's a psychology that says, I guess that was kind of possibly one of the most boring sentences I could have used to start something, but actually bear with me, okay? Because there's a reason I love all this stuff, because it explains the world. All right. It's not that I'm trying to put these things out there like a boring, droning book. I'm trying to put them out there because I can see how these things have made such a spectacular and significant change in my life. I can see how in my life I was ripping myself apart and I was destroying the people around me. And actually, the closer people got to me, the less I was able to love them properly and even respect them. At that point, I didn't really know how to love unconditionally. But I found it difficult to respect people that got close to me because I didn't have the respect for myself. And that sounds ridiculous. And at the time, I would have told you, no, that wasn't true. That wasn't the way it was at all, because I couldn't see it that way. I was in too deep. And I think this relates back to why in fighting monsters, we have a risk of becoming them. Because actually, when we fight something, when we don't want something in our life, when we've been badly impacted and we never want to be impacted like that again, strangely, one of the safest things that we can do, or so we think, is to actually become that thing we fear. Because if we become it, it can't get us anymore. That's kind of how we see it. I understand that maybe as an adult doesn't sound like the most logical approach to it all. But remember, we started doing all this when we were children, when we were still learning the right approaches to things, when we were little sponges that were taking up everything in the world around us and were making it kind of all about us. The healthy narcissism of childhood is that we have to focus on ourselves in order to survive, little screaming child can't survive on its own, right? A baby can't survive on its own. So we have to have healthy narcissism as children. But we also, as we grow, as we start to take on more and more responsibility for our own lives, we actually have to also take on the responsibility for making changes, because that's the control that we have. So we change ourselves because we have more control over ourselves than we do anything else in our lives, right? And so you can kind of see how those things come together, in that if there's something in our lives that we are desperately unhappy with, that we don't want to be at all, that we want to get rid of from our lives, but we can't, because we can't change that other thing. The thing we can change is ourselves. And so in that, one of the directions that we take in the subconscious, this isn't something that we necessarily knowingly do, although it could be depending on the age span, but as children it's something we often do in the subconscious, and we actually start to take on some of the traits of what it is we don't like. So I think all of us would see how this relates to bullying, and children who bully and children who are bullied. So there's that idea that if you don't want to be bullied, that you should fight back. And so in some ways, it depends to what degree you do this, because in some ways, we can see children around us, and we can understand as we look at this, them actually kind of becoming the thing that they don't like in order to defend themselves from it. Now, that's a very restricted and quite a small, although bullying can be really upsetting, it's a relatively small kind of incidence of it. And it's something that a lot of us do pass through, as in we pass through it and come out the other side. So we might turn around and face up against a bully in order to not have to encounter that all the time in the future, a lot of us don't then transcend into just using that fight capacity, that fight with other people or with that bully on repeat when that bully is not attacking us. So we do have the capacity to dip into these things and to come back out of them. Those who fight monsters, right? We can fight the monsters and we can retain and come back to ourselves. We don't have to stay like that. But those who fight monsters should take care not to become them, because if we get stuck in that process, if we over focus on that power and that control that maybe that instance with the bully gave us, we can start to flex that in other areas of our lives and with other people or with those bullies over and over again, in which case we are actually becoming the bully or of others. And we can also recognize people in our lives who we see this happen with. It's quite kind of common to see people going through this transition in childhood and see them trying to, if they're having something difficult potentially at home with a sibling or a family member, they will try to flex their power in another way. If they're having something, and a lot of families will really recognize what I'm about to say next, if they're having an issue in school, they will, with a bully or something, they're being bullied, or they're finding issues with what the teachers or people are requesting of them, they're finding frustrations, they will then come home potentially and then try to exercise their power on their parents, their family, their siblings, that kind of thing, in order that they can kind of act out in another way. They can kind of show and prove to themselves that they have that power and they're safe in another way. They're flexing in one place because they're struggling in the other place. And it's kind of this preparatory thing for maybe trying to take that flex into the place where they're having troubles. But at the base of it, do we ever really want to become that which we hate? No, not at all. And I had this experience as a child. I was a child that it was easy to bully. You would have thought anyway. I was a bespectacled, like I had glasses. I still do, I'm wearing them right now. Like slightly overweight, not really fit and healthy. I had a pretty poor diet as a child. And and I wasn't allowed out that much. So the thing is that while other kids were playing in the street and interacting and going to recreation grounds and stuff, getting that kind of fitness of mobility, I was in a lot. I read a lot of books, I was academic, I was nerdy, which I actually think is a really beautiful thing when you love it, which I did. I loved learning, and it's really opened up my life. But I did encounter people who wanted to bully me because of that, because I fit that kind of criteria. But I also had a bit of a split in my personality. So I also had this capacity to dip into these elements of my character that were kind of a bit more aggressive. So I'm not kind of advocating this as a way to go, but I'm showing how it can explain everything. Okay, so it wasn't something I had voluntarily, and it was often something that I wouldn't quite know what I'd said or what I'd done. But I would kind of come back from that, and that kind of bullying prospect, that bully who had wanted to bully me, that was not going to happen anymore. And so I most of the time I don't even know what I did or said, but it drew a line under it. And because of the fact that I had that kind of split or structure in my personality, I was never really tempted to remain in that. I didn't have it to remain. I didn't have the control that way. I never intentionally went into it. But I can see how it got me where I wanted and maybe needed to go, which was to be bully free. So it's a very difficult issue in our life, that idea that we're going to take on these issues in our lives. We're going to come up against these things that are negative for us, that we fear, that we hate, that we dislike. And how are we going to make ourselves heard and safe from them without becoming them? And you can see now why it's actually very, very common for us to step into those shoes, the very shoes of the thing that we're trying to get away from, in order that it shouldn't attack us. We become the wolf, so the wolf will never find us in the forest. We become the most dangerous thing around, so that we don't have to fear anything. And start to look for that. Have a look in the people around you. Listen when people talk, and notice where people actually, throughout their lives, they can choose to face their issues that way by actually becoming something that they don't necessarily feel is true to them, or doesn't seem true to their character, or they don't necessarily want to be, but feeling they have to in order to protect or save themselves. So how can we get around this? How can we actually move forward? How can we deal with things like bullies? How can we deal with that kind of stuff, yet also retain who we truly are? So this relates back to the past podcast, so the most recent episode on being seen. Because if we are being seen as who we truly are, if we have 1, 2, 3, one is enough, but 2 or 3, more is good. If we have these people in our lives that we can open up to as ourselves, and we can be accepted as ourselves, and we can be appreciated as ourselves, then we come to a point where, as we step out of character sometimes to deal with these situations, we don't remain out of character, because it is safe to us to come back to our true character. However, if we don't have those people who can see us as who we truly are, and we don't have those people who can affirm that we are good, we are awesome, we are perfect just as we are. Who are you? I want to know you. I want to know you just who you truly are. If we don't have people like that in our lives, if people are always projecting how we should be onto us, if we feel like things haven't been accepted by the people around us, if we don't have anyone who can be our full true selves with, then we can feel like it's not safe to step back into that trueness of ourselves. And that's how we can choose to remain the monster. And that choice, in inverted commas, can sometimes be a subconscious choice because as it wasn't safe to be ourselves, as we had no proof of that as children, and then we step into this kind of monster role in order to deal with something because we feel we have to. If we get the outcome we want from stepping into that role, well, then it can seem like that's a better role to be in. That's a safer role to be in. That's a more in favour of our survival role to be in, rather than actually coming back to who we truly are. But if we don't come back to who we truly are, we've lost something far greater. Because in not being who we truly are, we abandon ourselves. There is no greater abandonment than abandoning yourself. And it can be difficult sometimes to notice under the issues in life where actually self-abandonment might have occurred. I think it's probably universal, actually. As I was working through this in myself, I struggled to feel that and notice where I had abandoned myself, which was ridiculous because now retrospectively I can easily pick those things up. But I got to have compassion for myself. I didn't know all these things at the time. It's taken years of work and understanding and reading and research to actually draw all of this together. And this is why I'm sharing it with you for free, because I feel like we're going to have a better world if everyone has access to this information and if everyone can have access to it in a more clear and concise way, rather than having to trawl through all the stuff that I did. But this doesn't mean that you might not want to get more help for you specifically. So just listening to somebody and feeling a resonance, maybe feeling a mirroring, maybe feeling something in yourself. Were you accepted by somebody for, truly who you completely are? Did you have to hide some things of yourself? Did you have to put some parts of yourself away? Did you have to become something that you weren't just because others expected it of you? Did you have to front up against a bully or against someone in your life as a child or later on in life? And did you have to try and gain that power that way? And were you able to just do that for a moment? Or did you feel like maybe it was better to stay like that because that was safer? Were you able to step back into who you are? And is that 100% totally who you are? Or do we all have some things that we pushed into the shadow when we were children, when we were younger, when we were growing up and growing through our lives, that maybe we might like to have a look back and resurrect from that shadow so that it can be a part of our lives in the future, so we can be whole? So I think it's really, really important to notice those things about ourselves and to give ourselves an opening and a space so that we can have a look and see, are there any aspects of our lives, are there any points at which we actually self-abandoned? And a lot of these points in our lives will actually be so suppressed, they'll be so pushed down because we won't want to, they're painful, we won't want to remember them, and our body will hold on to them. So there's the book, The Body Keeps the Score, because it does. So our body will hold on to them as tension, as issues, and they might come up from time to time or constantly, that kind of issue, that kind of traumatic experience. And I say traumatic experience because a trauma is anything that comes up that we don't know how to deal with at the time, and so we suppress it. We suppress it in our knowing self, but it's still stuck there somewhere in our bodies and somewhere in our minds. And the way we can process that is we can start to liberate it in our bodies, in our minds, and there's different ways to do that. One of the great ways I found is hypnosis. So hypnosis actually enabled me to not just unlock a door that maybe I wasn't sure was there, but unlock the door beneath the door beneath the door. Because sometimes these things were so critical to us, they seemed so important, and even though we can deal with it now, we've got way more tools, we're way more advanced, at the time it was so strong and serious to us that we really battened that down under a lot of hatches. We didn't want that rising up whenever we kind of weren't ready to handle it. And so we kept it there and we battened it down so tight that now in our conscious mind, we can't even necessarily find it. So hypnotherapy can really help you to connect through your subconscious to actually bring up what's there and is ready for processing. And it's never a fear to go into hypnotherapy, because the thing is that you're never going to be bringing up anything that you're not ready to process, that you don't have the tools for now. You can trust that. And so it was actually such a strong benefit for me that I trained as a hypnotherapist and started working as a hypnotherapist, because it made a huge difference in my life. It opened up the whole world for me. I managed to take my life from a place where it was me against the universe, and that was not a fun place to be. That's a lose-lose, because you either lose because it's you against the universe and, am I going to win that battle against the whole universe? Or you lose because it's you against the universe. So even if you win, you're alone, you're isolated, you've won over the whole universe. Brilliant. But it's not that we actually want. We don't want to win so much as we want to connect. We want to be in cohesion and support and connection and joy with each other. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to chat about today. I wanted to chat about that idea of having compassion for ourselves and for others, because it's actually frightfully easy to become the monster that we don't want in our lives. Frightfully easy. And this is why a lot of criminals were once themselves the victim of crime. This is why the vast majority of abuse victims were themselves abused. Unfortunately, what happens in the subconscious is it seems safe or safer to become that very thing that hurt you, in order that because you're it can't get you ever again. But I don't really think that that's what we want in life. That's something that we trap ourselves into. And for better or worse, we're all in this together. So let's try and help with some compassion, with some care, with some self-reflection. Let's help liberate ourselves and others.
We are all telling our stories. And we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you, because your story matters.